Fellas, the Alexander Volkanovski title reign is unfortunately over, and to honour the career that Volkanovski had as the featherweight champion, I'm going to be ranking every single title fight of Volkanovski's career, whether he won it, whether he lost it, every title fight of his career, ranking from worst to best, starting off with the worst title fight of Volkanovski's career, in my opinion, is the second fight with Islam Makhachev. Now, if you're an Islam fan, and to be honest, this was a good win for Islam. He went out there and did what he needed to do. He knocked out Volkanovski when he was obviously training for Oliveira, so good win for Islam. But I just feel like it was just so Volkanovski didn't need to fight at this time. It was a horrible career decision because, I mean, listen, I'm not saying that he would have beat Topuria if it wasn't for this fight, but this fight definitely had some sort of effect on losing to Topuria. Maybe it was the confidence, or maybe it was the fact that he came back so quickly after a knockout. It just wasn't needed. I did want to see the rematch, but I didn't want to see it on 12 days notice against Islam Makhachev. Yeah, just a terrible time, especially the fact it was in Abu Dhabi. They could have done it in so many better places. I've never really been a fan of Abu Dhabi cards, so I'm going to say that this is one of the worst fights to watch as a Volkanovski fan. And on top of that as well, this was also Volkanovski's first time ever getting finished in the UFC. Like, he'd lost obviously to Islam again, but this was the first time he's ever been finished in the UFC. So overall, it was just a terrible occasion, and it was the worst fight, or at least the worst title fight of Volkanovski's career. Next, we have the rematch against Max Holloway. Yeah, for some reason, whenever Volkanovski has rematches, they end up being terrible. Now, the fight itself wasn't that bad. It was actually super competitive. It was a back-and-forth fight between the two of them, but the reason it's so low down on this list is because of the takeout from the fight. It wasn't like everyone was leaving this fight thinking, oh, what a scrap between two featherweights. A majority of MMA fans kind of didn't dislike Volkanovski, but they definitely didn't want him as the champion because Max Holloway was a fan favourite going into this fight. Everyone was a massive fan of Max Holloway, and because a lot of people thought Holloway got the edge over Volkanovski and, managed to pick up the win, a lot of the takeout was that Volkanovski was seen kind of not as a villain, but seen as this guy that didn't really deserve to be the champion. He was a very talented fighter, and it was a very close fight, but I feel like because a lot of people still had a bitter taste in their mouth because of Volkanovski being champion, I'm going to have to say that this is the second worst title fight of his career. The fight itself wasn't bad, but everything else surrounding the fight is what I'm going to have to say, well, is why this is so low. Next fight is the Korean Zombie fight. It was kind of depressing to watch because Volkanovski just battered Korean Zombie, an absolute legend in Korean Zombie. To see him get beaten up in the way that he did against Volkanovski. I know this wasn't the original fight. It was supposed to be the trilogy against Holloway. Then Holloway pulled out. But the replacement fight being Korean Zombie, it was just depressing. It was an out of prime Korean Zombie. He was never going to win the fight. He was never going to win the fight. It was never even going to be competitive. And then just watching him get battered until Herb Dean had to step in and stop the fight. As good as it was to see Volkanovski display how dominant he was in the featherweight division, to see it to a guy like Korean Zombie was just nothing short of depressing. So this is definitely not one of his worst fights, but it definitely wasn't satisfying to watch him beat Korean Zombie, especially a legend like Korean Zombie. So I'm gonna have to say that that's his third worst fight. Now we're getting into the fights that are pretty decent. So none of these are bad, but none of these are like spectacular. We've got the first fight with Holloway next. Yeah, this fight was actually a pretty decent fight. Obviously, at this time, Holloway was the champion and Volkanovski was challenging him for the belt. It was a decent occasion. I liked the event, and I liked the fight as well. It was very back and forth. We had Volkanovski chewing up Holloway's legs in the fight, and at this point, Holloway was definitely, a lot of people thought Holloway was going to come in there and beat Volkanovski. It was a competitive fight. I wouldn't say it was a robbery, not a robbery, but I wouldn't say it was as close as the second fight. I did think Volkanovski definitely came away with the win. The fans, again, weren't really too sure about Volkanovski. He was this new guy that came out of nowhere and beat the fan favorite. You could see when Volkanovski got the belt wrapped around him, the fans were kind of bitter about it, but overall it was a decent fight. Nothing absolutely spectacular to take away from this fight, but it definitely wasn't a bad fight. So I'm going to say that Holloway versus Volkanovski 1 is next. Then we've got a fight which I actually think is really good. This is one of my favourite Volkanovski fights. Brian Ortega versus Alexander Volkanovski. This wasn't just a good fight, it was a good build-up to the fight. The whole build-up, the Ultimate Fighter that they had, and then they had a few exchanges at the weigh-in. They definitely had a great build-up coming into this fight, and I feel like overall, this was a definitely heavily promoted fight, and I really enjoyed it as well. One of Volkanovski's best defenses, and then the fight itself, Volkanovski just piecing up Brian Ortega like he normally does to the rest of the featherweights. But the one thing that made this fight so interesting was the iconic guillotine that Brian Ortega had on Volkanovski Volkanovski, and we were all on the edge of our seats for the entire fight. We thought Volkanovski was going to go to sleep right there and then, and because Volkanovski was able to escape the guillotine and shock everyone, this is the fight that made a lot of people a Volkanovski fan, because of the fact that he was able to escape a guillotine and go out there and dominate Brian Ortega. Overall, really fun build-up, really fun fight, and I enjoyed this fight thoroughly. So Brian Ortega versus Volkanovski, definitely one of the better title fights of Volkanovski's career. Next fight. This weekend, Ilia Topuria versus Volkanovski. Now, I understand if you're a Volkanovski fan, this is very, very depressing. This is really depressing to have a full camp, not really any excuses besides the Islam fight, and then to go in there and get knocked out by Ilia Topuria brutally as well. It's not good to watch as a Volkanovski fan. But I will say again, the build-up to this fight was so exciting. A stacked card. We've got Ilia Topuria, an undefeated contender against the champion Volkanovski. You know, building it, you know, selling a fight. We've got Topuria with his whole villain arc going out there. And to be fair, good win for Ilia Topuria. Knocking out a guy like Volkanovski, who's always been seen as untouchable in the featherweight division. That was a really, really solid win for Ilia Topuria. I've got to give him his credit where credit's due. I know it's a very depressing fight to see as a Volkanovski fan, but I've got to give him the credit. It's definitely one of Volkanovski's best title defense. The occasion, not defenses because he lost the fight, but title fights, I mean. The occasion, everything about the fight, besides him getting knocked out, I was super excited to watch it. And even though Topuria did manage to knock him out and it was quite depressing, it was definitely a good build-up to the fight. So I'm going to have to say, as depressing as it was, fair play to Topuria. I'm going to have to put it high up on this list. Now we're in the top three, right? The three best title fights of Volkanovski's career. These are the ones that make us sit back and want to rewatch this multiple times. In third place, I've gone with the Yair Rodriguez fight at UFC 290. This was a dominant win for Volkanovski, let's just say that. Yair Rodriguez obviously coming off a really impressive win over Josh Emmett coming into this fight. And the overall fight was super interesting. I mean, we had Yair Rodriguez, this tall kickboxer with great jiu-jitsu. I remember so many people were saying that Yair Rodriguez always going to knock out Alexander Volkanovski with a head kick. Volkanovski's finished. And then for Volkanovski to go in there and do what he normally does to the rest of the featherweights and piece up Yair Rodriguez. And the thing that made this interesting as well, similar to the Brian Ortega fight, was there was a little time in the third round, I think it was, where Volkanovski was kind of getting tagged by Yair Rodriguez. Nothing significant, but he was getting slightly tagged by Yair Rodriguez. And then that's where we all start to, you know, not shift our opinions on the result of the fight, but that's where we really started to kind of bite our nails. And then Volkanovski goes in there, cracks Yair Rodriguez, and then eventually goes for the finish and finishes Yair Rodriguez at UFC 290. Great way to end a stacked card as well. Definitely one of my favourite defenses by Volkanovski, and that was a solid win. One of my favourite Volkanovski fights as well. Now we're in the top two. My second favourite Alexander Volkanovski fight is the Islam Makhachev first fight. Everything about this fight was perfect. The entire promo of the fight as well. You've got Alexander Volkanovski, one of the greatest featherweights of all time, dominating at featherweight. At this point, he was undefeated in the UFC against Islam Makhachev, the new lightweight champion of the world. Looked pretty much untouchable, one of the pound-for-pound most dangerous fighters in the UFC. This was the definition of the best versus the best in the UFC. There was no other fight you could make that was as close as this fight on paper. And then the entire build-up to the fight, how there was so many different contrasting opinions of who's going to win. The fight happened, and it's just one of the best fights of 2023. Such back and forth, the striking of Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev, where they both dropped each other. The fact that Volkanovski did way better than we expected when it came to grappling as well. Such a close fight. Such a great fight. I will admit there was definitely a lot of people that kind of ruined it by, you know, yelling at the fact that Volkanovski was apparently robbed. I didn't think Volkanovski was robbed. I just thought it was a super close fight that Islam Makhachev won. But overall, the fight was amazing. The build-up was amazing. I've got to give Islam credit as well. One of the best title fights of Volkanovski's career. And the number one title fight, in my opinion, for Volkanovski is the Max Holloway trilogy. This is probably Volkanovski's, in my opinion, his best defense. It was because not only the way that he did it, but who he did it against. Max Holloway was the best featherweight in the world if you take away Alexander Volkanovski, especially for the fact that, like we talked about earlier, the second fight with Holloway was so competitive as well. At this point, obviously, Holloway had come off two great wins over Calvin Kattar and Yair Rodriguez, and there was a lot of people thinking that Holloway was going to get the win because of those two dominant performances and because the rematch against Volkanovski was so close. And Volkanovski just goes in there and batters Max Holloway for 5 rounds. He made it look like Max Holloway Holloway was just another contender. This just showed how far ahead of the featherweight division that Alexander Volkanovski is compared to the rest of the featherweights. Dominant win, and even though if you're a Holloway fan it can be quite depressing to watch, you've got to give Volkanovski his credit. This was one of the most dominating performances of his career, and he shut all the people up that were saying that Holloway's better than Volkanovski because the second fight was so close. So overall, dominant win. But yeah, that is me ranking every single Volkanovski title fight. Let me know if you agree with these down below, if you have any different switches in the list, but that's my personal opinion. And yeah, let's hope Volkanovski can get another win, and thank you for watching.